Greetings, friends and brethren. This is Dr. Bob Thiel for the Continuing Church of God. I want to talk about lost tribes, prophecies, identities, and errors. This is the second part of a multi-part series we're planning on doing related to lost tribes and prophecies, which is from our latest book, available free online at ccog.org. Now, I want to cover some prophecies about the tribes of Israel, their likely identities, as well as to prove some of the identities that are wrong that people have said. I'd like to start off in the 49th chapter of the book of Genesis. This will be from the New King James. You might want to go there because I'm going to read a very number of verses, quite a few actually. And this prophecy is from Jacob, the man whose name was changed by God to Israel. So when he's talking to his children, he's talking to the sons of Israel, or the ones who became known as the tribes of Israel. So Genesis chapter 49, starting verse 1. And Jacob called his sons and said, "Gather together, that I may tell you what shall befall you in the last days." And I want to start here, mention these are for the last days. Now, according to the New Testament, the last days didn't begin until Jesus came, which therefore means these things were not fulfilled prior to the time our Savior was walking on the earth. Anyway, continuing verse 2, "Gather together and hear, you sons of Jacob, and listen to Israel your father." Verse 3, "Reuben, you are my firstborn, my might, the beginning of my strength, the excellency of dignity, and the excellency of power. Unstable as water, you will not excel, because you went up to your father's bed, you defiled it, and went up to my couch." He was involved with one of his concubines. Verse 5, "Simon and Levi are brothers, instruments of cruelty are in their dwelling place. Let my soul not enter their council, let not my honor be united in their assembly. For in their anger they slew a man, and in their self-will they hamstrung an ox. Cursed be their anger, for it's fierce, and their wrath, for it's cruel. I will divide them in Jacob and scatter them in Israel." This has to do with what happened with their sister and their revenge regarding Dinah. Okay, verse 8. "Judah, you're the one whom your brothers shall praise. Your hand shall be on the neck of your enemies. Your father's children shall bow down before you. Judah is a lion's whelp. From the prey, my son, you have gone up. He bows down, he lies down like a lion, and as a lion, who shall rouse him? The scepter," as royalty, "will not depart from Judah, nor a lawgiver from between his feet until Shiloh comes. And to him shall be the obedience of the people, binding his donkey to the vine, his donkey's colt to the choice vine. He washes garments in wine, his clothes are in the blood of grapes, his eyes are darker than wine, and his teeth whiter than milk." So we see various prophecies about different sons. Now here's the next tribe. "Zebulun shall dwell by the haven of the sea, and he shall become a haven for ships." Now I pointed this out last time. We know this wasn't fulfilled in ancient Israel because you can see Zebulun on this map. It's as far from any large water body as any of them. The only other one would be Simeon. So there's no way this was fulfilled back in the ancient times of ancient Israel. Just using that one as an example. But again, Jacob said these were for the last days. "Issachar is a strong donkey, lying down between two burdens. He saw that the rest was good, and that the land was pleasant. He bowed down his shoulders to bear burden, became a band of slaves," or as other people say, to become type of workers. Verse 16, "Dan shall judge his people as one of the tribes of Israel. Dan shall be a serpent in the way, a viper by the path that bites the horse's heels, so that its rider shall fall backwards. I've waited for your salvation, O Lord." Now what's interesting, talking about Dan being a serpent by the way, this might explain partially why when we read in the book of Revelation about 144,000, that Dan's not listed, because there's a prophecy about him being the serpent by the way. All right, verse 19. "Gad, a troop shall tramp upon him, but he shall triumph at last. Bread from Asher shall be rich, and he shall yield royal dainties. Naphtali is a deer let loose. He uses beautiful words. Number 22. Joseph is a fruitful bough by a wall. His branches run over the wall. Archers have bitterly grieved him, shot at him, and hated him. But his bow remained in strength, and the arms of his hand were made strong by the hands of the mighty God of Jacob. And we believe that this is talking about the United States and the British peoples here, because this certainly applies. Anyway, by the God of your father who will help you, and by the Almighty who will bless you, with blessings of the heaven above, blessing of the deep that lies beneath, blessing of the breasts and of the womb, blessing of your father, have excelled the blessings of my ancestors. Up to the utmost bound of the everlasting hills they shall be on the head of Joseph. And by the way, Joseph had 2 sons. And the crown, the head of him, was separate from his brothers. And various ways, the sons of Joseph were separate from the other tribes or other sons. Verse 27, Benjamin is a ravenous wolf. In the morning he shall devour the prey, and at night he shall divide the spoil. Verse 28, all these are the 12 tribes of Israel, and this is what their father spoke to them. And he blessed them, and blessed each one according to his blessing. Again, remember, these prophecies were for the last days. So these tribes must be on the earth someplace today. Moses also gave some blessings, and we'll do that, cover those another time, prophetic ones. Now I want to go to Amos 9:9. You don't have to go there, but I want to read it. This prophecy says, for surely I will command, and I will sift the house of Israel among all nations, as a grain is sifted in a sieve, yet not the smallest grain shall fall to the ground. So that shows, by the way, that the descendants of Israel, Jacob, Israel, would go through various lands, yet God would be able to sift them and identify them. Now, there's some clues in the New Testament about the tribes, because sometimes people say this is all Old Testament stuff. Well, we're going to go to Luke 22. I'm going to read verses 29 and 30. And Jesus said to his disciples, I bestow upon you a kingdom, just as my Father bestowed one upon me, that you may eat and drink at my table in my kingdom and sit on thrones, judging the 12 tribes of Israel. So there's still, in the Bible and in the New Testament, it's a Christian concept, there's still the 12 tribes of Israel. And there will be, because this is what's going to happen with the original disciples. They've got a role. Jesus said it. And obviously God knows who's part of what tribe. Otherwise, Jesus couldn't have said that. Now I'm going to go to Colossians 3, verse 11. And I'm going to read this from the Douay-Rheims Bible, which is a Roman Catholic translation. Paul writes, where there is neither Gentile nor Jew, circumcision nor uncircumcision, barbarian nor Scythian, bond nor free, but Christ is all and in them all. Now, each of those comparisons at the beginning are making a contrast. First, with the Gentiles not being Jews. Jews, by the way, are the descendants of Judah. The circumcised, those not circumcised. In general, of course, all the children of Israel were supposed to be circumcised, and everybody else most of the other world was not circumcised. And then also notice between the Gentile barbarians and not being Scythians. Now many of the Scythians descended from Israel. And the Scythians lived north of Judah beyond the Euphrates River. Now I want to go to James 1:1. You don't have to go there. That's interesting. God had this inspired in the New Testament. James wrote, James, a bondservant of God and of the Lord Jesus Christ, to the 12 tribes which are scattered abroad. So the idea that the tribes were scattered, this was known still in the 1st century AD. And the fact that James addressed these tribes in his letter suggested he knew where at least some of them were. And now, where were they? I want to read something from the Jewish historian Josephus. This is from Antiquities of the Jew, chapter 3, 5:2, it says here. Josephus wrote, "Wherefore there are but 2 tribes in Asia and Europe subject to the Romans, while 10 tribes are beyond Euphrates till now, and there are an immense multitude, and not to be estimated by number." So Josephus recognized that there were a lot of these children of Israel, and that the bulk of the 10 tribes were not in Judea-Palestine area. Now, when he wrote what he did, he was south and west of the Euphrates River. He essentially seemed to think that the bulk of the Israelites were part of, or they mixed with, groups like the Caucasian Scythians, as they were also among people who were beyond the Euphrates. Now, some were probably still there then, but others had already migrated further north and west by the time Josephus wrote this. Much of the tribe of Judah and some of the Ephraimites, who were in Britannia, and the Reubenites, who were in ancient Gaul, were then under Roman domination in the 1st century. But the fact is that during the time of Jesus, Josephus did not believe that the 10 tribes were part of Judea, Palestine, in the Roman Empire. Now, later in the 1st century, there's something from a Jewish writing that's not part of the Bible. This is called 2nd Barak, and I'm going to read from chapter 78, verses 1 through 3. This is not scripture, but it may be, we think it's probably historically accurate. So these are the words of that epistle which Barak, the son of Neriah, sent to the 9.5 tribes, which are across the river Euphrates, in which these things are written. Thus says Barak, the son of Neriah, to the brethren carried into captivity. So they know that they were carried into captivity. The Bible records this happening in the book in 2 Kings, where we read about this captivity. Anyway, it says, "Mercy and peace I bear in mind, my brethren, the love of him who created us, who loved us from of old, and never hated us, but above all, educated us. And truly I know that, behold, all we, the 12 tribes, are bound by one bond, inasmuch as we're born from one Father." So again, in the 1st century, we've got another report that says the descendants of Israel, said 9.5 tribes, that would make 10. Even though they're related to Israel, they were somewhere north of Palestine. Now, the fact that they should be expected to have descendants today, who are alive today, doesn't seem to be of major consequence to a lot of historians and theologians. Now, there's also an apocryphal writing. It's either a late forgery, or perhaps it's from the 2nd century. And it claims to be the 29th chapter of the book of Acts. Now, there is no 29th chapter of the book of Acts. This is certainly not scripture. And it's called the Sonnini document, Sonnini document, or the Sonnini manuscripts. And part of it says that certain of the children of Israel, about the time of the Assyrian captivity, roughly 720-something BC, had escaped by sea to the isles afar off, as spoken by the prophet, and called by the Romans Britain. Now, again, this could be a forgery, so we're not relying on it. This was not publicly revealed until the 19th century, and I haven't seen something that proved it was real. But if it's real, it does provide additional support. Now, that being said, Jesus once told his disciples in Matthew 10:6 to go to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. And in the 4th century, the famed church historian Eusebius, he supported the Roman Catholic Church, wrote But to preach to all the nations of Jesus, to teach them about his marvelous deeds, others should go to the Parthian race, yet others to the Scythian. And some have crossed the ocean and reached the Isles of Britain. So we see connections between the Brits, the Parthians, and the Scythians in historical documents. As I mentioned before, in the book of Colossians, the Apostle Paul mentioned the Scythians. Now, while not all Scythians, by the way, it's spelled Scythians, were descendants of the tribes of Israel, it seems a significant number of them were. As far as more of them later moving, I want to read something that the late Dr. Herman Hay, who I knew, wrote. Greek writers in the time of Christ recognized the regions of North Asia Minor were non-Greek, except for a few Greek trading colonies in the port cities. New peoples, the Greek tell us, were living in northern Asia Minor in New Testament times. Notice the surprising account of Diodorus of Sicily. It was written 1st century before Christ. Many conquered peoples were removed to other homes, and 2 of these became very great colonies, and one was composed of Assyrians, was removed to the land between Paphlagonia and Pontus is in northern Asia Minor, and the other area was drawn from Media and planted along Tanis in ancient Scythia, which is kind of like by where modern Ukraine is. Continuing, Herman Hay wrote, notice the areas where they came from: Assyria and Media, the very areas to which the house of Israel was taken captive. He says Parthia was defeated by Persia around AD 226-224. Expelled from Parthia, the 10 tribes and the Medes moved north of the Black Sea into Scythia. See R.G. Rotham's The Native Races of Russian Empire. From there, around 256, the 10 tribes migrated with their brethren from Asia Minor into northwest Europe. So, anyway, around 2nd century AD, the Scythians, by the way, tended to drop out of known history as far as much of the mainstream is concerned. Well, it's because they migrated further north. Interestingly, in the 3rd century AD, a Roman bishop by the name of Hippolytus, he taught that the apostle Andrew preached to the Scythians. And some of these may have been descendants of Israel. And now there were different groups of Scythians, but it does look like many of them ended up in Europe and the British Isles. Now somebody else I knew, the late evangelist Raymond McNair, here's what he asserted. Most of the Scythians were Israelites. Who were those Scythians, or Cis, as they're often called? And how did the name Scythia originate? This is one of the names that the 10-tribe house of Israel bore in their captivity. Most likely, derivation of this word is as follows. The word Scythian appears to be derived from the Hebrew word Sukkoth, which is a term we use for the Feast of Tabernacles. We see later that the language of the Scythians, Scythiac, was very similar to Hebrew. Strong's Exhaustive Concordance defines the word as follows. Sukkoth, Sukkah, Booth, Sukkah, the name of a place in Egypt and of 3 places in Palestine. It says anyway, the Hebrew language is only written with consonants. The vowels had to be supplied by the reader. If you take the vowels out of the Hebrew word Sukkoth, the basic part of the word is S-C-T-H. Strong's Exhaustive Concordance spelled phonetically, with S's and C's with the same sound, like in cell and cell. And then he cites Leviticus 23, verses 42 to 43, Old King James. You shall dwell in booths 7 days. All Israel will dwell in booths. Your generations will know I made children of Israel dwell in booths when I brought them out of the land of Egypt. It was to be observed forever, Raymond McNair writes. The Hebrew word used in verses 42 to 43, translated as booths, is from the Hebrew S-C-T-H. The Greek word for Scythian, in our language, Scythian, is Scuthes, and it's pronounced pretty much like the Hebrew word for booth. The mainstream thinks the word Scythian means nomads, which is kind of interesting because dwelling in booths, actually when children of Israel were dwelling in booths, that's one of the things God talks about when they were nomads after they left Egypt. So it's consistent with what the mainstream teaches, but they don't go this far. They don't connect all the dots. And this was something that Raymond McNair was trying to do. Now, I'd like to read something from somebody else I knew, the late evangelist Debar Pardian. He claimed, among all peoples known under the general name Scythians, the Saki were the descendants of the children of Israel. Not only is it possible for us to notice a parallel by comparing traditions of the two peoples, but history even recognizes the majority of the people in the British Isles, particularly the Scots and the Saxons, were the descendants of the Scythians, thus of the Israelites. Anyway, some who either were Scythians or traveled through the area known as Scythia were part of the 10 tribes of Israel. Now there's differences of understanding about who's who. I want to read something now from a Jewish writer. His name is Yair Davididi. It's David with an IY at the end. Anyway, here's what he published. In Scythia, East Scythia, the Rabbani of Reuben bordered the Gerani of Gad. Rubiari is another form for Reuben. So it's a word, he says, in the historical records. Rubiari may have been similar to the Franks, their own name for themselves. The French descended mainly from Reuben. Again, this is from a Jewish source. Here's something else. The Chatai Scythai, Chinese records say that a portion of the Naphtalites who had been north of them moved westward prior to 450 CE. Jews don't usually say AD, so CE, say AD is basically the same thing. They also say that they previously had been north of the Altai Mountains and were part of the blue-eyed, fair-haired peoples. And then we also see, he writes, Finland has been identified as especially Issachar. Benjamin also seems to have been represented by the Normans. Britain was dominated by the tribe of Joseph, and especially the section of Ephraim. From Britain came many of the settlers of South Africa, New Zealand, Australia, and Canada. Then he also writes, characteristics of Manasseh are found in the USA. The Irish of today have characteristics applicable to Dan and Simeon. The founder of the Danes in Danish tradition was called Dan. So if Danish tradition says the founder was Dan, that kind of is very consistent with the idea being from the tribe of Dan. Then the last thing from this particular writer, this Jewish writer, the state of Israel and the Jews. Most Jews come from the tribe of Judah, followed by the tribes of Benjamin and Simeon together with Levi. Judah is the determining factor. So that's his view, and much of that seems in line with what we in the Continuing Church of God think. But what about Africa, like some say? Or are the Africans that came into the USA and other nations of the Western Hemisphere? Well, I did a full sermon on this, going over many scriptures. And you can find this, should find this on the same channel you're watching here. And it was titled, Were Ancient Hebrews Black? What About Jesus? Now today, I'm not planning on going through all the scriptures like I did when I did this before. But I do want to go over some points and some photos. Because again, since I'm doing a series on the lost tribes and various prophecies, and we do have some things regarding Africans in another part, I thought this would be a good time to address this subject one more time. Because they're basically groups called Black Hebrew Israelites, sometimes called African Hebrew Israelites, Black Jews, Black Hebrews, Black Israelites, Hebrew Israelites, and where they strongly and often vehemently assert that the ancient Israelites were black. This view was popularized after a man named Frank Cherry claimed to receive a vision from God that told him to declare a message that African Americans were the true descendants of the biblical Hebrews, which we don't accept that was from God. And by the way, most black Israelite groups are Unitarian, which means they wrongly deny the deity of Jesus. Now, as far as proof of the black Israelite doctrine goes, one black Israelite stated to me that he and I talked several times. He says, people thought when Moses fled Egypt, he was an Egyptian. You can see that in Exodus 2. He said Roman soldiers thought the Apostle Paul, who they arrested, was a rabble-rouser, and he was a particular one from Egypt. So you read that in Acts 21. Then he said the Egyptians were black, therefore the Israelites had to be black. Then I got something from somebody else, some emails, who just doesn't like what we have to say. And he said, Ephraim and Manasseh are not the U.S. and Britain. The Bible's exclamation of Ephraim and Manasseh's genetic line does not support your belief, but invalidates it. And that's not true. And I plan on going to that in much more depth in a future sermon. But I wanted to mention this because these people are pretty vehement about it. Well, the reality is the bulk of the Egyptians were not black. Now, there were some who were. And there were some blacks who intermarried or became part of the tribe of Judah. Okay? But we can prove whether or not the Egyptians were mostly black by looking at what they left behind in terms of pictures and drawings of themselves. Black Israelites are clearly wrong about Judah being Negroes, as they claim. Now, I want to put this up here. This is a poster that they tend to use, and you won't be able to read it really well. But here it says that Judah is Negroes, and in other places they say this means American Negroes. And then they've got different identities for the different peoples. Okay, they've got, for example, they say Manasseh was Cuba, Ephraim is Puerto Rico, Haiti is Levi, Simeon is Dominicans, I guess Dominican Republic, the Benjamin is West Indians, Zebulun, they say, are the Guatemalans and Panamanians. Gad, they say, is North American Indians. Reuben, they say, are the Seminole Indians, which would have been like from Florida. Naphtali, they claim to be the Argentinians and Chileans. Asher, they say, are the Colombians to Uruguayans. That's a long way down in South America, but okay. So probably make some others in there. And they say Issachar is the Mexicans. Now, I mentioned that they claim that Puerto Rico is Ephraim. But it says in Genesis 48, verse 19, that Ephraim was to become a multitude of nations. And that's not really happened with Puerto Rico. You say, well, there's a few different groups over in Puerto Rico. Yeah, but it's not different than other places. It did not become a company of nations. Furthermore, in Genesis 48, it says that Ephraim would be greater than Manasseh. And certainly, in terms of landmass, Puerto Rico is not greater than Cuba, because they're saying that Cuba is Manasseh. So they've got this all backwards. So just looking at the scriptures, and again I'm going to get to other pictures in a few moments, but just looking at their identity there, you pretty much can say, no, this chart's absolutely wrong. Now we'll go through a couple other points about some of the other peoples on here. But the reality is, if you read in Exodus chapter 12, verse 38, there were some people of a, quote, mixed multitude who went out from Egypt with the children of Israel. And undoubtedly, some were black because there were some blacks in Egypt. Okay, so we're not denying that there were coming, but Egyptians were not black. So I'm going to hold up a couple of hieroglyphics right here. Say, you've got a blonde Egyptian, ancient blonde Egyptian woman. I don't know how well that's going to come up here. And then you've got an Egyptian woman with wings. Again, you can see she is Caucasian. And one of the reasons I'm showing pictures is, again, I've done a sermon where I went through the scriptures that they use, and they say all kinds of stuff. It says in the Bible, leprosy is when your skin turns white, and white people's skin cannot turn white. Well, actually it can. I've actually worked with Caucasians who had white skin issues, and so no, it can. Here's a couple of Egyptian women. Again, you can see they are Caucasian. And in this particular man, it's an Egyptian man who's working. His skin is on the darker side, but there are darker Caucasians. As a matter of fact, I'm darker than many Caucasians. But he doesn't have Negroid nor Mongoloid features if you look at him. Now, some of these people who say they were black Egyptians, they've objected to the use of pictures. They claim these people had their skins lightened for pictures because that was supposed to be a higher social status, as one of them told me. However, if that's true, that would also confirm the idea that the bulk of the pharaohs were not black. Okay, because if most of the pharaohs were black and some of the Black Hebrew Israelites claim that, then the highest status would be to be black, because nobody in their culture, at least no human being, was higher than the pharaoh, who was considered to be a god. And so even if there was some occasional lightening of skin tone, that doesn't change the facial features. Now, furthermore, when Negroid black men or black women are shown in hieroglyphics, they are shown black. Okay, not bronze colored, but black in the hieroglyphics that I've seen. So let's just look at this one. Now this is a sketch from 1820 of something they found from ancient hieroglyphics. So you can see this one looks to be black. This one is white. This one is white, and this one was more of a bronze color. But again, the bulk of the Egyptians were not black. Okay, one of the pictures that did not come out as well as I wanted, and I tried to tape some of these other ones together. I guess I missed this one when I was redoing this yesterday. I'll try to do it this way so that I can make it a little bit better. This is an actual mummy, okay, of King Ramses II. And let's see if I can get this to look right. And one of the reasons I'm showing this is it doesn't matter how anybody lightened or darkened his skin. If you look at his face, he is Caucasian. Okay? Now, I'm not saying, by the way, Caucasians are better than anybody else or anything. It's just that when we want the identities, we're looking into the identities of the tribes of Israel, I feel we have to debunk this idea that the bulk of the Israelites were black. Or they're all black, or they're black or Native American or some combination. Now, I'm going to put up a statue, show a picture of a statue. Oh, by the way, I'm sorry, before I go any further, when I showed that other picture that I just held up, one of these British Israelite persons said, oh, this was fake. This was not really the mummy. Okay? Now, I realize that we can't always trust the news, and I realize sometimes things are wrong, but this is accurate. There's no reason that anybody would have faked it. I'm sure they'll say there are reasons that they would have faked it, but I don't believe that, and that's nonsense. Now here is I'm going to show up a picture of a statue of Prince Rahotep. Now he was the son of Pharaoh Senuferu and his wife Nofret. Now you'll notice he was bronze colored. She is white. Also, again, looking at the facial features, They are Caucasian. And by the way, it was his father who was the one who apparently arranged the marriage. So he certainly wasn't black. By the way, he had straight hair. And she's wearing, by the way, in the statue, a black wig. And even though the prince is fairly tan, he also has what we call Caucasian features. Now it would seem that Joseph, who's the progenitor of Ephraim and Manasseh, likely married somebody fairly white, as the Bible showed that Pharaoh gave him a wife, in Genesis 41. But again, we've got a Pharaoh giving his son a wife, and his wife is white. There's no doubt about it. Should be no doubt for anybody about that. Now I want to show somebody from the ruling Egyptian royalty hunting. Now this is a picture from up here. And it's kind of on a rock here. You can see he's clearly white. Now some people, by the way, have said that Cleopatra was black. And Queen Cleopatra VII, here she is, does not look black. And people say, what if they lightened the skin color? It still doesn't change her appearance. She's not black. And now here's a sculpture from the 1st century BC, done at the time Cleopatra was around. And you can see her facial features on this, and the hairstyle, actually. She's not black. Also, sometimes some people had their pictures put on the outside of their mummies, the people who were mummified. So I'm going to show you something from, they're called Thiel mummy portraits. And these are from the 1st century BC through the 3rd century AD. Okay? Now, I've got some notes here. This is something called Marinette Stele or Stele. And this is from around 1200 BC. And it mentions the children of Israel. The whole thing is kind of long, but the only part that has the people, as I'm showing you here, again, they are not black. They are white. Again, it doesn't mean that there was never a black pharaoh. It doesn't mean that no pharaohs never had a black wife. I'm not saying that at all. Now, as far as the black pharaohs go, they actually tended to be Nubians, which would be in the area we now call Sudan. And history shows that the Nubians invaded Egypt, and they ruled from around 744 to 656 BC. But the children of Israel left Egypt in the 1400s BC. Anyway, but there were black pharaohs. And again, this is way after the children of Israel left Egypt. But the fact that they conquered for a while and had pharaohs for almost a century doesn't mean that they were the original pharaohs and they were the original rulers there. And the reality is, most of the pharaohs, early pharaohs, we don't have evidence of them being black or Negroid. Now, I'm going to put up something called the Berlin Pedestal. This may be the oldest archaeological discovery that mentions Israel. This is from the 1400s BC, and it shows 3 Israelite captives of the Egyptians for the first half of that century. Anyway, 3 of the enslaved males, these 3 enslaved males are not black, but have more of a Caucasian Middle Eastern appearance. The evidence is also consistent with the view of modern scholars, most of them who consider that the Jews from the Mediterranean branch are Caucasian, or they're from a Caucasian, Mediterranean branch of Caucasians. So here's this, again, it's ancient, it's from 3,400 years ago or so. And again, these children of Israel were not black. Now, below here, there's something from the 9th century BC. It's called the Black Obelisk of Shalmaneser III. but it doesn't mean that they're black. I want you to look at the hair and the beard of the bowing king. This guy here, he's supposed to be the king. He's bowing down before his conqueror. This is the king of Israel. His hair and his beard are consistent with somebody being Caucasian, not with somebody being Negroid. And well, what about the Scythians? I've mentioned them a few times. In 2010, it was reported that when the teams of geneticists led by Professor Brian Sykes took DNA samples in the Celtic region of Britain, they discovered the ancestries in the Caucasus, which lay within ancient Scythia and Mediterranean Europe. Now, as far as the physical appearance of the Scythians goes, we do have it on the back of our book here, but this is a little bit bigger picture. This is showing a Scythian archer from around 500 BC. Again, if you look, like say the nose, etc., this person does not look Negroid. Now, some have, again, tried to claim that, well, all the Jews were black, so therefore Jesus had to be black. Now, because of that claim, I went and I found some photos from the 1st century AD, around the time of Jesus. Now, these are about 40 years after Jesus was killed and resurrected. What happened was, after General Titus conquered Jerusalem in 70 AD, Emperor Vespasian issued coins, and the backside showed Jews. So you've got these two coins, and if you look at this person, he's conquered. He's a Jew who was conquered. And then you've also got these conquered Jews here. You can look again and see that these Jews are not Negroid. Now, this part here actually says Judah on it, in case anybody wonders. Anyway, these are Jews and not Africans. The writing in Latin is Judea Copta, and you translate that into English, it means Judea taken. So they're showing what they taught, the people they captured, or from where they captured, and they, again, are Caucasian. And again, you can see it here. The beard helps demonstrate that as well. Now, if most of the Jews were black, you would think that the coins would be portraying that, but they don't. I think this is absolute historical proof that no matter what color people think the ancient Egyptians were, or what their DNA was, that the Jews of the time of Jesus were not black. There's a headline, Discovery, well, let me show you this picture. I'll read the headline, then I'll read some about it. Discovery of Jewish mosaics in Israel bring color to biblical accounts. Well, part of the color, as you can see, these people were not portrayed to be Negroid. This is actually a depiction of Numbers, the book of Numbers, chapter 13:23, of grapes being taken from the Promised Land. So anyway, here's a report about this. At the ancient site of Hugag, near the Sea of Galilee in modern Israel, a number of stunning mosaics depicting biblical, astrological, historical narratives have been uncovered in a Jewish village that had flourished during the time of the Roman Empire. The large and colorful number of mosaics found in the synagogue challenged traditional views about Jewish art. And so, but it also gives us an idea of what they thought they looked like. So we get some color from there. And again, you've got two white people carrying grapes. Now, there's another mosaic which has two human faces on it. Supposed to be, one of them I think is supposed to be Samson, the other one possibly King David. You can see portrayed, and he's got red hair. Okay? Of course, now some people dismiss that. Well, that was too late. That was from the 5th century. By then, the phony Jews got in there or whatever. But every period that I picked, from going back 3,400 years through various centuries in between, we have a consistency. Okay, so we know. Now in 2018, they put out a bunch of these pictures, and there's some stuff that has floor mosaics of Noah's Ark and Moses in the Red Sea and all this. And experts say that these were basically Jewish life in various villages at the time. And so we've got a depiction that I'm going to put up here of the prophet Jonah being swallowed by a fish. And we know we can read about that in the book of Jonah. Now, I'm going to point to his legs down here so you may be able to see them. Okay, those are Caucasian legs. Jonah didn't have this lightened up to show he was lighter. This is one way after it happened to Jonah. But again, we're talking about him being Caucasian. Anyway, this particular mosaic says, this is 1,600 years old, and they were worked with the Israeli Antiquities Authority, as well as with Brigham Young University and Baylor University. Anyway, one of the reasons that I've showed so many pictures is to make it clear that, yes, it is possible that the descendants of Israel could have been in Europe because they had European features, Caucasian features. The Egyptians were not black. Again, there were a few that were, and for a short time there were these pharaohs, black pharaohs, for around 80, 85 years, 90, whatever it was, somewhere in that time period. But again, that doesn't prove that they were all that way. We do not accept that there was a vision from God that said the American Negroes were the Jews. That doesn't seem to make any sense. But again, some people assert that. But my point of bringing this out was not just to denounce or provide proof that the Black Israelite people were wrong, but to also provide supporting evidence that those of us who believe that the children of Israel went into Europe and the British Isles makes physical sense. You've got the migrations of the Scythians, you've got what the Scythians look like, you've got what the ancient Egyptians look like, you've got what various depictions of the Jews look like, and even when they were conquered, what they look like, because several things that I showed were from their enemies. Okay, when we've got the one king bowing down before his conqueror, the conqueror had no reason to lighten his skin or to change his features so he looked like something else. There would be no reason. And the same thing with the coins that one which had General Titus and the other with Emperor Vespasian on it. They had no reason to say, well, we want these people to look white. At least I don't think they had any reason to do it. Some may argue with that. And again, we saw the mosaics. We've seen drawings on mummies. We've seen hieroglyphics. Again, the descendants of children of Israel were white. And since I hold this up before, I'll hold this up again. I think this picture helps demonstrate that. And as far as the Scythians, again, they have Caucasian features. By the way, this book is available at www.ccog.org. Go under the Literature tab, click under Books and Booklets. The covers of all our available books show up. And now these are in our English versions. We have other versions of some of the books, not this one yet, but in time perhaps I suspect that we will. Anyway, we do not ask for your email address. We don't ask for anything. You could just read it. Check it out. Check out what we say against the Bible. Look up historical records. But don't be deceived by passionate people who are in error, who tell you, oh no, this is all false. It's obviously the only possibility is that these are black people. Because I was looking on the internet this past week or so when I was researching this. There are all kinds of comments. Oh, it's absolutely positively proof that the Israelites were black, etc., etc. And again, as far as scriptures go, if if you want to go to cogwriter.com website, we've got an article talk about is ancient Egyptians black or was Jesus black. Go there because the scriptures that the British Israelite people, the black Israelite people think are proof scriptures aren't. And you've heard the expression, a picture is worth 1,000 words. And I think several of the pictures that I put up were more than many thousands of my words, because I think they do provide absolute proof for everybody or anybody who wants to know the truth about this matter. Now, we in the Continuing Church of God believe that the descendants of Israel traveled to many places. And that's consistent with various prophecies. That God said they were going to go to different lands and he would sift them out. And while we're not saying that our identification of every single one of the tribes has to be completely correct, I'd like to at least go through our basic understanding, much of which we received from people like the late Dr. Herman Hay and some others who did research along these lines. Okay, so first of all, let's start off with the firstborn was Reuben, and actually I'm going to do this in a basically birth order. We say that France, mainly the northern part of France, the Bible talks about, which I read before in Genesis 49, about being dignified but troubled. So not everybody in France or ancient Gaul, we believe, were from this tribe, but we do believe this is where a lot of them ended up settling. Number 2, Simeon, we think was scattered among the tribes, throughout the tribes, because that's what it said was going to happen in Genesis 49:5. Some think that they're mostly in Ireland. Others think that they basically blended in with Judea, because that's where it was originally. We think they're scattered, so we're not sure. Similarly, Levi was promised to be scattered in Genesis 49:5 as well. And as far as that goes, when I was reading what the Black Israelites said, the Black Israelites said that Simeon and Levi were related to I guess Dominican Republic, I guess, and Haiti. Well, they're not scattered. I mean, they're on this island called Hispaniola, and Dominicans are mostly on one side, and the Haitians are mostly on the other side. Although because the Haitians are poor, they like to try to get into the Dominican Republic, get jobs, and that kind of thing. But they're not scattered throughout the tribes. They're saying, the Black Hebrew Israelite poster I held up said, those are who these people are, then therefore they're not scattered. So that's another contradiction to the position that they cling to, which again is false. Judah, number 4, the nation now called Israel. As well as there's Jews who aren't in that land, but were from the area near Jerusalem. And you can read that also in Ezra 4:12. That tribe is not lost. And yes, there are some black Jews. As a matter of fact, when I did my doctoral program, one of the doctors who was involved was a Jew who looked Chinese. He said he was a Jew. He didn't look like a Jew. He was Chinese. Looked fully Chinese because some of the Jews went over there and they maintained their religious beliefs, but because they ended up intermarrying with the Chinese, they ended up looking like the Chinese. As I said before, the idea of the 10 lost tribes, or all the tribes of Israel, is not one based on race, because there are blacks who are part of many of the tribes, and there's Asians, like the Chinese person I just mentioned, are part of different tribes. So that's not the characteristic. The characteristic is by descent. And how's that determined? It's determined by God. You may have your own ideas, I may have my ideas. But how the descent is determined is by God. And God says that He knows where they are, they're going to sift them throughout the lands, and He's going to bring them back. Now, if you don't believe the Bible, then you probably have a little point in watching this, or believing anything about this. But if you do believe the Bible, or you think you do, or you want to believe the Bible more, I believe that going through explanations about the tribes and who they represent and what God's plan is for them, as well as other nations around the earth, I think that's important to know. And I think it helps us be more faithful. I think it helps us understand that God does have a plan that He's working out here. Okay, number 5, Dan. Ireland, mainly southern part, perhaps some far northern parts in the outskirts. And they've named different places Dan. If you look in the book of Judges, they name different places Dan. Now there's some in Northern Ireland, or of course mainly, we think mainly are from Ephraim. And some in Denmark might be from Dan. So others maybe from Naphtali, or the Danites went through there. I'm certain that some Danites went through there. How many stayed versus kept going, that can be debated. Number 6, Naphtali. As I mentioned in Genesis 49:21 before, as Sweden, attractively described, and my wife and I have been to Sweden, and actually recently we went to Ireland. And I was thinking about these places. I've been to Israel, my wife and I have been to France. Okay, I'll see how many others as we go through. Gad, number 7. Some in Switzerland. And I believe, based on what it says in Genesis 49:19, they're going to have to temporarily accept European domination. Not necessarily the European Union, but the Bible talks about Europe reorganizing. And Switzerland was very, very close to Evian, France, which we went to the Feast of Tabernacles once. And we had to go to Switzerland for the strangest reason. We needed to exchange some money. And so the first day we got there, I didn't do it. The next day was a holy day, so we didn't do it. The next day was a bank holiday. Okay, so now I'm starting to run out of cash. I didn't have much with me, hardly any euros with me. And I felt I needed cash, and every place took credit cards. So I went to a couple of banks, and they wouldn't take American money. They wouldn't exchange it. And that happens from time to time. So we ended up driving to Switzerland. And so we go to a Swiss bank, and we go to change money. And they said, well, where are you staying? I said, in France. He said, well, why didn't you change your money there? Because to change the money in Switzerland, they had to change it from US dollars to Swiss francs, then from Swiss francs over to euros. So double exchange situations. So it would be cheaper to do it in France. I said, I tried to do it in France. I went to 2 or 3 banks. They wouldn't do it. So the Swiss banker gal says to me, yeah, they're like that in France sometimes. But anyway, fortunately for us, the Swiss did change our money, and that made it fine, so we kept the Feast of Tabernacles, and it all went well. Number 8, Asher, which we think is Belgium, and probably some in Luxembourg, and they were described to be wealthy, and actually people in Luxembourg are amongst the wealthiest in the world, and Belgium too, for that matter. Issachar. Well, as I mentioned before, the Jewish source says Finland. And Finland's mainly western. It's kind of between Europe and Russia. Now that's a country we have not been to, but we have been to Belgium. We actually went to Belgium for the Feast of Tabernacles. Matter of fact, that's probably the first or last time I met Raymond McNair, but I remember meeting Raymond McNair at the feast there. Okay, number 10, Zebulun. This one we identify as Netherlands. It's a haven by the sea. Rotterdam was for a time, maybe still be, the world's biggest port, or one of the world's biggest ports still to this day. They have ships. It fits the prophecies of Genesis chapter 19. And of course, there's some of their descendants in Africa as well as in the Caribbean. My wife and I have been to the Netherlands several times. Our children have been there as well. 11, Benjamin. Norway and Iceland. They're former Vikings, with some parts perhaps probably in Judah and Israel. My wife and I haven't been to Norway yet, but we have been to Iceland, so we saw these people. So yes, we've been to places where these peoples are. Number 12, Ephraim represents the United Kingdom, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, some in South Africa, and in Zimbabwe. It's supposed to be a multitude of nations, as it says in Genesis 48:19. Now, we've actually been to all those places except Zimbabwe. My wife and I actually did go to South Africa for the Feast of Tabernacles once, and went to Australia, the Feast of Tabernacles, Canada, Feast of Tabernacles. As a matter of fact, we've been to the Feast of Tabernacles in the United Kingdom, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and South Africa. But we've not been to Zimbabwe. Manasseh, the United States of America, a blessed nation, would be blessed according to Genesis 48, verse 19. Now, these tribes look to be in the countries that contain the physical cities of Israel that Jesus was apparently referring to in Matthew 10:23. He won't go through all the cities of Israel before he returns. Countries like Sweden, Belgium, Luxembourg, the Netherlands, Norway, Switzerland, Finland, France, Denmark, Ireland, Iceland, United Kingdom, United States seem to fit some of the statements that were made, and prophecies made about the tribes or the sons of Israel in Genesis chapter 48 and or chapter 49. Now, if you look at the list, and we'll mention that even though the Old and New Testament uses the term 12 tribes of Israel, for example, Genesis 49:29 and Matthew 19:28, there were actually 13 tribes. And you can read about that in Numbers 1, verses 5 through 15. Furthermore, the 13 are actually called tribes in the book of Numbers, chapter 1, verses 20 to 42. And I find that interesting because we read about a particular sacrifice in Numbers 19, verses 13 through 14. There are 13 bullocks for the sacrifice, which I think equates to 13 tribes. Now, we're going to go more into why there's 13 tribes in later sermons. We're also going to go into more detail about each of the tribes that I mentioned. In this particular sermon, all I've attempted to do, or much of what I've attempted to do, was to demonstrate, one, that there are prophecies that for the last days. Two, since there's prophecies for the last days, somebody's got to fulfill them. Three, this particular Jewish scholar identified lots of peoples similar to how we in the Continuing Church of God identify them. Four, I wanted to go through the fact that some claim the ancient Israelites are all black, or the Jews are American Negroes or something along that line. That's their term, by the way. And that's simply not true. So we'll go into more detail, though, as why we believe the different tribes are different places. But anyway, in terms of tribes, Joseph had 12 sons, but his son Jacob, also called Israel, had 12 sons. One of whom was called Joseph. Joseph had two sons, one called Ephraim, one called Manasseh. In Genesis chapter 48, Israel adopted them as his own. So he said, let his name be on them. So they would be called descendants of Israel, amongst other things, they could be. And so that brought the total of tribes up to 13. Now, as it turns out, in the New Testament, in the book of Revelation, Revelation chapter 7, we only see 12 tribes. So we're going to go through that just briefly. So let's go to Revelation chapter 7, starting in verse 4. And one of the reasons I want to do this, again, is to emphasize the fact that the idea that there are different tribes, and God knows the identities of these tribes, certainly knows it better than we do, okay, is a New Testament concept. Revelation 7, start in verse 4. Heard those sealed, 144,000 of all the tribes of the children of Israel were sealed. So the fact is, they're called all the tribes of the children of Israel, and there's one that's left out, means that apparently God no longer considers one of them a tribe. In verse 5, of the tribe of Judah, 12,000. Tribe of Reuben, 12,000. They're sealed, I won't mention that part. Of the tribe of Gad, 12,000. Tribe of Asher, 12,000. Tribe of Naphtali, 12,000. Tribe of Manasseh, 12,000. Now Manasseh, again, was one of the sons of Joseph. Of the tribe of Simeon, 12,000. Of the tribe of Levi, 12,000. Of the tribe of Issachar, 12,000. Tribe of Zebulun, 12,000. Tribe of Joseph, 12,000. So we see here Ephraim is called Joseph. But again, Ephraim and Manasseh were both sons of Joseph. And the tribe of Benjamin, 12,000 were sealed. You add this all up, you get 12 tribes. 12 times 12,000 equals 144,000. And we see that, again, we do not have Dan included here. In another sermon, I plan on speculating a little bit more about that, because the Bible doesn't clearly, in my opinion, lay out for sure the reason. But for sure what we do see is in the book of Revelation, chapter 7, God still knows for the future who the identity is of each of the tribes of Israel, decided for the 12. The others, I'm sure he knows who the descendants of Dan are as well. So I don't think Dan's left out because God forgot. God doesn't forget. Now there's a scripture, something like, can a woman forget her own child? And says, well, even though a woman could possibly do that, which seems impossible to most women if you went through childbirth, it's like, I would remember this. Okay? God says, even though a woman could possibly forget, I don't forget. So God knows he did not forget Dan. And no, I don't believe that when Jesus had John pen the book of Revelation, he forgot to put it in there. I don't think so. Because again, it said 144,000, so 12,000 times 12 is 144,000. Anyway, while Israel had 12 sons, again, after he adopted 2 of Joseph's sons as his own, there were 13 tribes. And sometimes they're called 12 and a half, and sometimes, like Manasseh, is called a half a tribe. But again, in the New Testament, in the last book of the Bible, Manasseh is considered to be a regular full tribe, but Dan is not. In future sermons, I plan on going through more depth about the identity of each of the 12 tribes, more specifically about the descendants of Joseph, but we're also going to be covering some information in future sermons on basically the scriptural ancestors of all the countries in Europe, or pretty much all of them, as well as basically those for the Asian peoples, the African peoples, and some others. So again, for more information about this topic, or I know sometimes or often I speak too quickly, you can go to read our free online book at ccog.org. Now, if you want to see a lot of the pictures that I did, however, that would be at the cogwriter.com website. That's cogwriter.com, and type in something like Jesus Black or something like that, and it'll come up that with all the pictures. Because we have less pictures in this particular book, particularly less color pictures. The only color we have in this book is on the front and back covers. Anyway, you can trust the Bible. There is evidence through history. There is evidence through migration. There is evidence through photographs and statues, etc., that the tribes of Israel had a Caucasian-like appearance, but again, others did interbreed or intermarry in them. And again, we don't say that if you don't look like a Caucasian, you can't be a physical Israelite. We do not teach that. And of course, we also teach that salvation is open to all. And when I read the passage in Colossians from the Apostle Paul, it says we're all the same in Christ Jesus. Okay, whether we're a Gentile or an Israelite, or whether we're a Scythian or a barbarian, okay, we're all one in Christ. We all can be one in Christ. And salvation is not a matter of ethnicity or descent. But the Bible reveals many last days prophecies that are based upon descent. We started to go over those today. We intend to go over more of those in the future. The Word of God has a true, sure word of prophecy. And we're explaining that to you, so we believe it would be better for you now as you live your life. You can put your full confidence in God and His Word. because his word will not be broken. This is Dr. Bob Thiel for the Continuing Church of God.